Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Hope you are doing well and you've had a good week. It is a very special Friday's Life for me. We are celebrating North America in a couple different ways today, so I'm excited. My name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the Research Specialist at Findmypast and North American Content Acquisition Manager. Actually, I have two jobs, kind of, but it is great to see you all. Start letting us know in the comments where you are, who you are, where you're from, what you're researching on. We would love to hear from you. We also, of course, have Liam in the comments today, so say hello to Liam. And I today learned Liam's middle name, so I can appropriately chastise him in a motherly, loving way. All right. Roz is with us in Massachusetts. It's a great time of the year to be in Massachusetts. It's humid, but lots of wonderful historical celebrations, so that's fun. Linda's with us. Janet's in North Wales. Andrew, it's a bit damp in Lancashire. Yeah. I was reading your comments about the first day of summer and Midsummer's Day, Andrew. So if you guys haven't seen that yet, go through the chat and read Andrew's comments. It's pretty funny. Andrea's in very wet Stoke-on-Trent. Karen in North London with us. Daphne's with us. Kim is in West Yorkshire. Right, good. Oh, Karen sounds like she's got some interesting stuff going on this week. Client work in Bangkok and British India. That's always interesting research to dive into. So I am in Colorado, for those of you who are not familiar. And we always start with a weather report. And I, once again, forgot to look up the conversion from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So today it's supposed to be around 80 Fahrenheit, I think, maybe a little bit of a light drizzle. So that is 26, 27-ish in Celsius. Pretty cool, actually, for this time of year from my area of the world. We will definitely get warmer, a lot warmer. And it was a lot warmer than that even just yesterday. So hopefully everybody's doing well. And have had a good week. So, all right. So, right, let's get started. We have lots to talk about this week, actually, because it was a huge, huge week for publication at Find My Past. We published a lot this week, which is really exciting. But first, let's start with, of course, the question of the week. Let's get this up so that you guys can start answering it if you didn't see it yet. How do you incorporate national holidays into your family history? And by that, I mean the kind of American Canadian version of national holidays, right? Holidays are classified in different ways across different countries. And when I use the word holiday at work, I always get a little bit of a look of confusion, because to me, a holiday is a single day, right? Like the 4th of July or Canada Day. Or Thanksgiving, for example, is kind of a federally recognized holiday, and of course, in other cultures, holiday is the same as going on vacation, right? So, a little bit of vernacular play there today. But how do you incorporate national holidays into your family history? And that could be what you do today, but it could also be how you research how your ancestors celebrated holidays, or if they celebrated holidays. It could be how you discover materials or photographs or resources about those particular events over the course of your ancestors' lives, or it could be kind of incorporating some of their traditions into your worldview today. So whatever you do, please share. We'd love to hear about it. And obviously, we are going to um, we are going to take advantage of the calendar this week. I love Andrew's answer. This is great, by obviously taking the opportunity to do, free access to records from big genealogy websites. So, yeah, it's a really good point, right? Absolutely, Andrew. So, but you could always, if you're not a subscriber to Find My Past, you could take out that free trial any old time you want. You don't have to wait for a holiday. Just saying. Um, okay, so let's get into our content for the day. I'm going to share my screen. I got to move a couple things around here because I have 3 monitors and it gets very confusing. Okay, so let me try to get this set up here. 2 seconds. So I can still see your comments, but I can also see what I'm doing. That is the goal. All right. So we're going to put that question of the week up one more time. How do you incorporate national holidays into your family history? Think about that. Answer in the chat. Let us know what you do and how you do it, and maybe some ideas, right? But in the meantime, we've got new records to talk about. So we want to acknowledge and celebrate a couple of holidays that are happening over here in North America. Of course, the first one is July 1st. It is Canada Day. So happy Canada Day to everybody who celebrates. If you have ancestors who maybe immigrated to Canada, maybe they're collateral members of your family or different branches of your tree that you've never looked at, this is a great opportunity to learn more about Canadian history and your ancestors' experience in those countries, in that country. What you're looking at is Sergeant Gregson. He is the first Canadian of the Canadian Expeditionary Force to land in the UK in 1939. This photograph was published in the Daily Mirror, and is available in the Find My Past photo collection. So he was the first one kind of off the boat, and he made headlines as kind of one of the allies coming together for the start of the war. We also, of course, have another holiday this week, which is exciting, of course, to many of us, and that is Independence Day in the United States, or the 4th of July. So, for all of you out there celebrating Independence Day, happy Independence Day to you. Now, this picture I could not find. Like, this is one of the best pictures I think I've ever found in our photo collection. This is British RAF cadets that have just arrived in Florida for training, again in that World War II era. So there's no exact date on this one, just circa 1940s. But it is a fabulous photo. So they make this big deal about the girls being dressed as cowgirls, and they're serving donuts and orange juice, which, of course, orange juice is very appropriate to Florida. But the donuts and the cowgirls, I'll admit, confused me a little bit. There's not a lot of cowgirls in Florida, and there historically never was. But obviously, trying to make it very American, right, for these cadets from the RAF. And there's a couple of people in this photograph that are really like, really interesting to kind of look at and examine what they're looking at and who they're looking at. There's two right here in the front. And I don't think you can. No, you can't see it when I use my mouse. But there's some people in this photograph that you really have to wonder, like, what are they thinking right here in this moment? This is just such a great photograph, right? With the Union Jack in the background, the American flag, obviously, and just all sorts of stuff happening here. This is such a cool picture. Um, Anyway, happy Independence Day to those of you who celebrate the 4th of July. Right, so new records this week are all about North America. Let me click over. There we go. We have published actually quite a lot. So we have the 1931 Census of Canada available on an image browse as of a couple days ago. So this is very exciting. And actually a little bit more attached to this in terms of our partnership with the Library Archives Canada. We'll give you that update in just a second. We've also published in partnership with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society the parish records from St. Luke's Evangelical Lutheran Church with baptisms, marriages, deaths and burials, and then confirmations. And that spans basically the whole history up of that parish, all the way up to when we're allowed to publish, right? 1925 is the cutoff date for privacy reasons. Um, and then the very interesting Challenges in Duels, which you see cover actually several countries. So it is a publication that was written in 1855 and published in 1855. It was published by an American historian. So there's a lot of American events in there, but there's also Scottish, English, Irish, Canadian. I don't think I found any Australian, but kind of challenges and duels between people from really all over the world. And the year range on this is actually correct in the sense that in this publication, he published information even for all the way back as the Bible, as far as the Bible. So we'll show you a couple of examples of why we're saying that the year range starts at year 30. It was a bit of a different one for us, right? Because how do you publish an event that happened BC, right, in that time frame? So this it's a good week for historical records. All of these have images attached, which is great. These are not indexes; these are indexes and images, except for the census. The census is just an image browse, no name search on it just yet. All right, so let's dig in with some examples. The 1931 Census of Canada is first. This is what it looks like. If you haven't seen it yet, it just got released on June 1st by Library and Archives Canada for the very first time. It is available on a couple of different genealogy sites, so you might have seen it already, but we are excited to publish it and add to our census collection. Of course, it's such a huge complement to the 1921 Census of England and Wales because you can find that path back and forth, right? So you have the 1920 Census of the United States, the 21 Census of Canada, the 21 Census of England and Wales, and now the 31 Census of Canada. And if you add in the 1939 Register from England, you've got kind of a two solid, real solid 2 decades of research going back and forth between two countries, Canada and the UK, that are really united and tied together in many ways, politically, historically, religiously, socially. You have a lot of war brides moving back and forth during this period. You have travel is easier during this period, so people are getting on steamships and making that journey across in a much shorter amount of time. So it's really possible to find a lot of different people kind of moving around captured in these national census collections. So it's pretty exciting. um, it's really fun to see this. Now, I have Canadian ancestors who were in Canada at this time. They weren't actually in Canada for very long, only about a generation and a half, but they were in Alberta. So of course, my first record that I sought out was some of those people. So I found Julius Kitzman, who's my second great grandfather. Um, he actually dies a couple of years after the census is taken. So for me, this is probably the last kind of big record set I'm going to find him in. And he's actually living with the family of his daughter, Carolina, who has married Herman Frederick, and they have 4 children by this point. And they are living in Black Mud, which is a rural municipality in Alberta. Now, I had never heard of Black Mud before the census before. I didn't know that Julius was there. I actually thought he was about 150 miles away. So this was a real eye-opening census for me. It really gave me a chance to kind of dig into him a little bit more and explore him a little bit more. So it confirms what his likely last residence is because he's living with his daughter. And again, he dies a couple years later. Also helps me understand their religious affiliation. I love this about the Canadian censuses. That in this case, they have captured their religious affiliation. You can see kind of closer to the right hand side of the screen, there are comments around evangelical or Lutheran. Of course, we're still seeing in this census, we're still seeing evidence of the Church of England. In this census, we see an increase. I saw an increase in the Jewish community across the communities in Alberta that I'm looking at. So a really interesting perspective on the Canadian census that they capture that religious denomination. I love that bit. They also asked a question in the census about whether or not they had a radio in the household, which I think is just this really fascinating little bit of social history, right? To understand where your ancestor was in terms of that technology piece, right? So this household does not have a radio. I was kind of hoping that someone would, but so far none of my ancestors owned a radio yet. Um, and it kind of helps you kind of just understand and bring all of that together, right? So just a really great census, and we're really excited again to partner with the Library Archives Canada on this census, but also on a great deal more. We actually made an announcement yesterday that we have entered into a partnership with them for the first time, and we have a lot of new records coming out of Canada. So it's really fun. It's been something I've personally been working on for quite a number of months now, and I'm super excited to be able to bring Canadian records to the Find My Past site. It's really really good because there's so much connection there, right? And it's fascinating. All right, I'm gonna stop now. The other thing that we did with this particular census, it's important in this census, especially because we don't have a name search yet, that you know the district and sub-district. So we've added that information to the site. Now, there are a number of different ways to see this list on a number of different genealogy related websites, right? But we did publish it as it came to us from Library Archives Canada. So and now these are big pages. They do take a minute or two to load because this list is super, super long, right? And it's sorted by sub-district number. So if you're looking for a particular location by name, the easiest thing to do is a control find or a search on the page, and then type in the name of the village or the town or whatever it is that you're looking for. If you don't know the subdistrict list, or the subdistricts for the census, refer back to the 1921 or even the prairie censuses of 1926 if you happen to have prairie provinces, and compare to what subdistrict they were in at that time. And that's probably your best way to start. It may have changed. It may not have. It just kind of depends on the population and development over that period. But make sure that when you're using the 1931 census, that you're taking advantage of the fact that this sub-district list has been published for each of the provinces, so that you can really kind of refine your search and get an idea of where you need to be looking. You can see that as one of the links on the search screen for the 1931 census, or you can go directly to the URL, which is, of course, posted on the page or on the screen. So, yep, I think that covers it for 1931. But if you have questions about the census, right, do feel free to send those in or chatter with us on the Find My Past forum. It's a fantastic record set, and of course, it's brand new, so everybody's learning about it together, and it's always really exciting to see another national census come out. Okay. Next up on the list of new releases this week is our material from New York. And like I said earlier, this is in partnership with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. We have been in a really great partnership with them for a number of years now. Um, so they actually digitized this material, and then we were able to provide a name search for it. So we did the transcription and they did the images. It's a fantastic record set. This is St. Luke's, and it includes baptism, marriage, burial, and confirmation records. St. Luke's is right in the middle of Manhattan, and it was originally a Dutch Reformed parish and then converted into a Lutheran parish. And these records, you guys, are so detailed. Almost all of them spread across 2 pages, like you're seeing in the image on the screen. The format changes a little bit over the course of the roughly 85 years or so that the collection covers. But it's super important on these that you look at the original image, because there is so much detail on these records. Now, the first couple decades are largely in German, but we have transcribed that German as best we can, and made that name searchable. So make sure that if you're looking in the earlier years, that you're using your name variant search box a lot to try and capture that kind of German reflection of the language. About 1920 or so, they convert over and almost go entirely into English. When I say look at the original images, it's super important on these records. I wanted to show you an example of why that is. So this is from the burial collection, right? So this one page includes their date of death, the name and address of the deceased, which it's really unusual to find an actual physical address. It's their last known residence. The headstone inscription. So in this case, it's showing the exact age. So you can then go back and calculate the birth date, right? The date of burial, the cause of death, and then the location of the burial. All of this in one record. So in these burial records, you're getting their birth date, their death date, their age, their cause of death, their name, their address. It's an incredible record set. And we're just super excited to be publishing these. So again, St. Luke's out of New York. It's a really great record set. And even if you just appreciate old records, it's a chance to, or you want to practice transcription or anything like that, this is a great one to use that for, because there's lots of different handwritings. And of course, the German in there is always really interesting as well. Okay. All right, I'm trying to kind of keep my eye on comments, but I'm really excited about these records, you guys. This has been a great week for me. The last thing that we published this week is the challenges in duels. Now, this is, as I mentioned earlier, a publication from 1855. We took that, we extracted all the names as much as we could and the dates and locations out of it and made it name searchable. And this covers a number of different countries. And these entries are, this is like gossip gone crazy. Like, this is such cool stuff. I've just included a couple of examples, but there's all sorts of stuff in here. And one of my colleagues found a reference to a duel that was fought because of a conflict over a dog, right? Like the dog barked at him and he felt offended. And so they ended up challenging each other, like because of dog. Um, so obviously challenges and the duel is a kind of a cultural practice that's been going on for a very, very long time. You're seeing a couple of examples here, one from Canada, there's one from, I think this other one is from England, on this screen. And in this example, they're kind of they're lords and upper class and such, but this material actually does include all classes and all types of people. There's a number of entries, for example, from California at the start of the gold rush that just says, Smith challenged Davis or whatever, and there's not a lot of information on some of them, but some of them are quite lengthy. So these are just fantastic, right? You're getting a lot of information and context. So what this really was is this guy was the author who wrote this piece, was a U.S. representative, back in the 1800s, early 1800s, but he actually was more famous for his historical research into loyalists during the Revolutionary War period, right? So British loyalists, those who remain loyal to the crown during that conflict. So he kind of is a known historian, but alongside all of that work, he probably uncovered kind of all of these moments in history, right? These challenges. So he ends up publishing that as a separate text altogether, and that's what we've actually been able to capture and publish and make name searchable. So there's all sorts of information in here. So duly noted, right? It's published in 1855, so that's about when the records stop. But he does, as I mentioned earlier, he goes all the way back through history, and covers as many as he can find. A couple of entries that I thought were really interesting, right? This one in Ireland, where they actually indicate that this individual Butler, Honorable Somerset Butler, was a accomplished duelist. Like, how many duels have you been in? Um, that's concerning, right? But Butler actually ends up dying as a result of this particular instance. And then, of course, one of the most famous, possibly, is the duel between General Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, who was at the time the Vice President of the United States. Famous historically, made famous through the musical about Hamilton. And it is discussed thoroughly in this publication. I think it's something around 14 or 15 pages worth of context, as to kind of how they ended up dueling and why. Um, just really great stuff, and of course that's my personal favorite to read through, just because I'm a fan of that period and the musical. As you guys know, so that one was really good. They go way back though. So one of these entries is for the year of Rome 404, right? And so he's really pulling everything he can find from every source, whether it's genuinely proven historically kind of or not, right? So just bear in mind that there's a lot of content and information in this publication. It's a fun one. It's a lot of fun to just read through this kind of page by page and scroll through and investigate. In the publication, there's also a lot of contextual information in the front pages and then in the appendixes about culture around duels, how they were perceived, legalities for various countries, laws that were passed to try and prevent this from happening, et cetera, et cetera. So, a lot to read here, a lot to take in. Okay, we've been talking for a while already, and yeah, I haven't even gotten to newspapers yet. So, newspapers, we have 5 brand new titles from Ireland, a total of 50,000 new pages just for Ireland. So, it's a really great week for everybody around the world. This is just a fun week for publication, I'm telling you. You can see the titles on the screen, a variety of year ranges, some of them going back to the 1800s, 1875 for Wexford and the Kilkenny Express. The one that we thought was probably the most delightful to share was the Constabulary Gazette from Dublin. It is, we've published the full range of the publication as far as we know. And this is one of those papers that you can totally just get lost in and just start scrolling through, because there's all sorts of random stuff in there. It's life advice. It's also reviews of the police force. It is the official newspaper for the police force in Dublin during that time period, and it's so fun. So a couple of the things that I found, and this one actually really surprised me because I don't think I've seen this in a UK paper before. But this is an advertisement from a company that makes jewelry, right? Essentially, a stopwatch and other brooches and things. I've pulled out a piece of it so you can see it a little bit better. These are actually relatively common in the United States, especially when in regards to fraternal societies. And I have long used these types of publications to identify little bits and pieces of historic photographs, right? Like if they have a certain insignia or a jewel on their chest about from some organization, you can use these types of publications to actually go back and compare to the photograph and try and figure out what that piece is. So I've been doing that actually for a number of years with US organizations, but I had never seen one in a UK publication before. So I was really excited to just stumble across this advertisement. And my colleague, Rose, who is our newspaper expert, actually informed me this morning that it's not very common in UK papers, that she's seen a handful of them, but not very many. So I was pretty excited to see this. If you have some of those old photographs and you're not really sure what those pieces of jewelry are or insignia, that's a great trick. Internet Archive is full of publications like that. Although, again, in my experience, they're largely US based. So I don't know. It's a good trick to try and identify little bits and pieces from family photographs. This newspaper, of course, also includes kind of what you would expect, right? So news from the police force. So right in the middle, there's a story about a gallant rescue from a drowning. There's a list of transfers and promotions. There's a memorial, but there's just so much to explore in this newspaper in particular. It's a really fun one. Make sure that you give yourself some time to look through this title because I think it's delightful, especially if you have Irish history, right? Okay. That is it for new records. Lots of comments. So let's go through. Yeah, I'm gonna hold off on comments for just a second. And we're going to talk for a second about the two holidays that we're celebrating this week. Now, obviously, it's not yet July, but we didn't want to wait until after these holidays were done to celebrate. So I wanted to just give you a little bit for those of you who don't know the history behind Canada Day or Independence Day. Let's just take a second to do that and think about how it reflects on our ancestors, right? So Canada Day is a federal holiday. It celebrates the anniversary of Canadian Federation, which occurred on the 1st of July, 1867. So, of course, Canada Day is the 1st of July every year. So, if we kind of review that history really quick, in 1867, they passed the British North America Act, which takes three separate colonies, the United Canadas, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, and unites them into a single dominion within the British Empire, which they called Canada, which is essentially how the country that we know today and its borders are developed, right? In 1982, it's renamed from its original celebration name of Dominion Day. It was Dominion Day from 1867 to 1981. In 1982, they passed the Canadian Constitution in the Canada Act, and they changed it from Dominion Day to Canada Day, which is the holiday that we know today. So the question here really is, if you have ancestors in Canada from 1867 all the way through modern day, what did they think about Canada Day? How did they feel about being a single dominion within the British Empire? How did they feel about Canadian Federation? Did they read about it in the newspapers? Did they talk about it amongst their colleagues, their coworkers, their social circles? Did they celebrate? Right? You kind of assume they probably did, but all of these questions kind of start to be asked. So even if you're sitting in, I don't know, uh, Edinburgh, right, or Dundee, and you have ancestors that went to Canada, have you ever thought about how you might incorporate or research their celebration of their new country? And if you're sitting in Canada, have you ever thought about the opposite perspective? What did the family back home think about Canadian Federation, right? So same questions we can apply, of course, to Independence Day, which commonly is known as 4th of July. But I prefer Independence Day because I'm just that kind of person. Of course, commemorates the Declaration of Independence, which was ratified on the 4th of July, 1776. So again, a quick review of that history. So the Declaration of Independence was ratified by the Second Continental Congress, which establishes the United States of America. So the delegates at that time have declared that the 13 colonies are no longer subject or subordinate to King George III, the monarch of England at the time. The colonies were now thus united, but they were also free and independent states. And it took some time for all of the colonies, now states, to actually kind of sign on to this idea, right? Independence itself was actually approved on July 2nd with the passing of the Lee Resolution, but the Declaration was adopted 2 days later, almost really as an afterthought. So here's this piece of history, this Declaration of Independence that most Americans kind of could probably start to recite, right? And kind of held up as this really monumental moment in history. But for the founding fathers, it was quite honestly a bit of an afterthought. The Lee Resolution and the fact of independence, which passed on July 2nd, that was actually the important moment. They didn't realize that the Declaration was going to be such kind of a rallying cry until it started to get out into the public and people started reacting to it. So, kind of same question, right? How did your ancestors feel about independence? How did they were they loyalists or were they rebels? Did they did they appreciate this declaration in the way that we do today? Um, and for those of you who maybe have ancestors across the UK or maybe even in Australia, now today, do you feel like there's some kind of a connection there, or was there anger or bitterment, or were they resentful of the colonies kind of starting this conflict and going to war with with the motherland? So there's a lot of questions that we can ask in terms of how we celebrate these holidays, but also how our ancestors celebrated. So put that question of the week back up. How do you incorporate national holidays into your family history? I'm really curious to know the answer. So we're going to move over to comments. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can do that. So, for example, right, this could be done in any number of ways, but um, a number of years ago now, I realized that I have two lines on my paternal side that actually originate in England, that I hadn't really known that much about before. So the first line came over in 1635 into Massachusetts. The second line, though, didn't leave England until the 1830s. And at that point, that's when I kind of started to go, well, wait a second, his culture um, would have been very, very different than the man who left 200 years before him, right? And so that's when I started. So I actually very intentionally started using Christmas crackers as part of our Christmas celebration. We'd never done that before as a family, and I started buying Christmas crackers. And every year it kind of reminds me, like I'm incorporating a little bit of that British culture from my past and my family lineage into kind of my modern holiday celebration. Um, yeah. So just one example from my own self. Okay, so let's go back and look at question of the week responses. I have to scroll. Uh, so give me just a second. All right, Kim's going to start us off here with my mom's cousin has a day named after her in Alaska. That's so cool. Susan Butcher Day on the 1st of March. Okay, I'm gonna have to look it up. Don't know that one. That's exciting, Kim. I how does that happen? How do you get a name? How do you get a day named after you? I want to know. I don't deserve a name, but I feel like some other people in this community deserve a name, right? A day. I think people deserve a day. That's cool. Karen says she's never incorporated a national holiday or bank holiday. The only thought is rent and taxes paid on certain days. So that's interesting. Okay, um, so in theory, you could incorporate that type of research, right? What what did your ancestors pay in rent and taxes, right? And build that into their timelines. But maybe something to think about, Karen. Okay, cool. Karen also says that the 4th of July is her very English paternal uncle's birthday. Yeah, cool. Anya had a family who immigrated to Canada where they married and moved back to Scotland. 100% them, as their daughter was baptized in Scotland, said she was born in New York, obviously on the way back over the pond. A lot of back and forth between New York and Canada specifically, right? They're right there, they're neighbors. But also because both ports were very, very busy places. And it was often cheaper to travel into Canada than it was into the US. So you'll see a lot of people going back and forth over the border many, many, many times over the course of a lifetime. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Kim Adds to the discussion. My eldest two children have their birthdays on Valentine's and Groundhog Day. The youngest child is upset she doesn't share her day with anything of note. Maybe she needs a day named after her. Like, I mean, and maybe that's a chance to Google, right? Like, there's all these, International Coffee Day or International Day of Poetry. Maybe you can find one for her, Kim. Susan says, I always love researching national holidays by studying what led up to picking those dates and family recipes for the celebrations. That's a great idea. Love that. Yeah, family recipes are a crucial part of celebrations like that, right? The big one for my family is Memorial Day, which is a holiday in the United States, where we remember everybody who died as a member of the armed forces. And generally speaking, it's a holiday that acknowledges those who died while in service. Um, and the family would always get together. We'd go to the cemetery where most of my paternal ancestors from that area are buried. We'd clean off headstones. We'd lay flowers. We'd tell stories, and then we'd go back to my great uncle's house and have this big, like, spread of food, right? And I grew up with this tradition, and they're still doing it today. And my father grew up with this tradition. We have pictures of him, his generation kind of standing under this particular tree, and then my generation standing under the same tree. So yeah, there's a lot of food involved in those memories, and uh, family recipes that have been kind of everybody knows which family is bringing which piece because we've just been doing it that way for so long, right? Thanksgiving's kind of the same way, or I suppose Christmas, maybe for many people that family recipes become a big part of that. Um, okay, let's see. I'm skipping the comments about new records because I'll go back to that. I just want to do question of the week for right now. My Anya says, "My Christmas money from Santa pays for my annual subscriptions." I mean, that is incorporating a holiday into your family history research, no doubt about it. That's good. I like that. Um, da, da, da. Okay, Ellen adding that as I usually scramble around cooking too much food for Thanksgiving. Me too. I think of the four surviving ladies, including my ancestor Eleanor Billington, who had to cook for scads of people, including the Native Americans who stopped by. Yeah, I think about them a lot too, Ellen. And if you don't know what we're talking about, look back in the history of the first Thanksgiving, and do a little bit of a little bit of background reading there. Um, it was a big event, right? That first Thanksgiving, and only for women to really pull it off. It's a big job. Doo, doo, doo. Okay. Let me see what else. What else we got? Victoria is having a very busy day. Lots of calls. Um, that's fun. Oh, Anya, yeah, duly noted, right? On the duels. Cute. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Kim telling us why her ancestor has a day named after her. She won the Iditarod Trail Run twice. That's so cool. I know about that much about that particular event, but that is impressive. So wow, that's really cool. That's really cool. Karen's adding that her son's birthday is Armistice Day, but it's not a holiday in the UK. Daphne telling us that her daughter-in-law celebrates Tomb Sweeping Day. It's a national holiday in Taiwan. That's interesting, Daphne. I just learned about this actually myself. My cousin lives in Taiwan. His wife is from there, and they've raised their family there. He's been there for ages. Um, Decades since he graduated university. So probably, I mean, at least 30 years or so, 40 years. No, not 40 years. That's too many. Maybe 30 years. Anyway, they live in Taiwan, and he was telling me about their traditions around this when I saw him just a few weeks ago. So that's really interesting that you bring it up. And it kind of does like open my eyes a little bit, right? I have thought a lot about American holidays, Canadian holidays, even British holidays, but and Irish, right? Like St. Patrick's Day. Um, but I haven't really delved into the traditions of people in my family tree that have kind of gone a little further afield, right? And it's an opportunity for me to do a bit more research that I'm excited about, and a chance for me to incorporate kind of some of those little bits of information and knowledge, right? Tomb Sweeping Day is a very big event in Taiwan, as I understand it. So you can kind of say, like, I know at least where my ancestors were on that day just about every year, and be able to go back and track um, kind of some of the cemeteries and the history of that family based on the cemetery location, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, interesting stuff, Daphne. Very interesting stuff. Victoria has a day. A Victoria. There is a Victoria Day in May in Canada. So yes, Victoria gets a day. That's good. Anybody else have a day? I don't think there's any Jennifer days. I've never Googled it. I don't know. Anya has her birthday is World Day for International Justice. That is pretty cool. Also Emoji Day. Cool. Emoji Day. Didn't know we had one of those either. Do we need an emoji day? Right. This has sidetracked a lot. This is really good. All right. I'm going to go back and look at some of these comments as well from records. I know I saw a few about the 1931 Canadian census, so I wanted to share those as well. Um, Andrew has relatives in Nova Scotia. So in 1931, 4 out of 8 households were on one street. Um, so all on one image. Yeah, that's really cool. And a fifth was a family one of mine married into, right? So a fifth family on the same street. Yeah, so for those of you who haven't used Canadian or American censuses before, if you're really accustomed to like the 1911 or the 1921 census in England and Wales, or some of those two census years are so different because you get the individual household returns. The US and Canadian censuses are more like those earlier British census materials where you kind of just have a running list of people street by street by street. The unique part about most of the UK census is that they actually document the address in a much more detailed way, and they don't necessarily do that as well in the US specifically. Canada's a little bit better at it in terms of capturing the actual address. But yeah, it's fun when you can find a number of households on one image. Most of the people in my tree for the 1931 census are from these very little tiny towns in Alberta, and so it's the whole population is like 6 or 7 images, and I just download all of them because you know, I have them somewhere. Yeah, really, really good, Andrew. So well done on finding those. Shirley telling us that 2 of her great aunts moved to Canada in 1912. So there's a lot of opportunity there, Shirley. Obviously, you've got the major censuses, but also immigration records are much better by that period. And it would be interesting to know if they became citizens of Canada, if they naturalized while they were there, or if their children were just born there. Um, Always a great opportunity for additional research. Karen says she has used the Canada 1931 census. Her second cousin, 3 times removed, was born and died in Williams Lake, British Columbia. Oh, all the way to the west. His mother was from Sugarcane tribe, father from Lincolnshire. Perfect. So you've got an immigration story. You've got um, a native Canadian, right, or a citizen, natural born citizen of Canada. Lots of interesting things there, and then that connection back to Lincolnshire, right? I always I always look at those immigrants and just like who else from that community immigrated as well. Was that a popular place to go, right? Did a lot of people from Lincolnshire go to British Columbia? I don't actually know off the top of my head. But in my case, for my folks in Alberta, they their motivation to immigrate there was because they were in Russia and they needed to leave, but also because this minister had come in and said, if you agree to being Moravians and part of the Moravian faith, then we can get you over to Canada for free, basically. There's this whole migration scheme that he cooked up to specifically bring Moravians into Alberta. And it's fascinating, right? It's like this little, and there's all this correspondence back and forth with the government of Canada, and it's really interesting stuff. And then when they make this big deal about it, right, from a press perspective, right? There's all this PR around these people, these Moravians immigrating into Alberta. And they get off the boat and they say, and the press is saying to them, like, you know, how do you celebrate your Moravian faith on the voyage, or whatever they asked. And my family member, one of my ancestors, looks at this reporter and says, "I've never been to Moravia. I'm not Moravian. I'm from Russia." Like, didn't yeah, that so there's all sorts of interesting history. And so now the 1931 census, because it's got that religion column on it, I'm going back in each one of those lines, each one of those families, and saying, all right, how many of them are still identifying as Moravian or have converted over to Lutheran, or some other faith altogether? How many of them are actually still saying, I am still Moravian and I still practice this Moravian faith? Of course, in their communities, a Moravian church was the most influential. So it could have just been circumstantial, right? That's the easiest church to get to. So that's where I go. But yeah, it's such an interesting story. I love censuses that have religion on them. I just love it. All right. What else? Lynn comments on the 1931 census as well. It's the first census that her father's parents appear on. Father was born in England and mother born in Scotland. They got married in Golden, British Columbia. My grandfather's parents and youngest three brothers have settled on a farm just outside Redcliffe, Alberta. And tomorrow we have a family picnic. That's great. My ancestors that I've been talking about were not that far from Redcliffe. So I know that area. So that's exciting. Um, I hope you enjoy your picnic, because it is Canada Day, and that's a fun thing to celebrate. I haven't decided yet how I'm going to celebrate Canada Day this year. Usually I do something, but it's usually just me, right? Because like even my husband and my daughter are like, really, um, but you know, I enjoy it. I'll find some way to celebrate for sure. Daphne says she was excited to find her grandfather and uncle in the 1931 census. Apart from his war record, know very little about him. 47% Scottish and have never met any of my Scottish relatives. You know what? I am a little bit Scottish too, and I'm still working on that. I've met lots of people from Scotland. They're all wonderful. Um, and I can't wait to be able to proudly proclaim that I have discovered my Scottish ancestry. Um, but yeah, I'm glad you were able to find him in the census and get a little bit more detail about your grandfather. That's exciting. Um, doo, doo, doo. Right. Um, Karen made a suggestion I wanted to pull out, when I was talking about the jewelry from the newspaper, right, and all the insignia and such. She has used Google Lens to look up mystery items. I've done this as well. It's a great tip. Thank you, Karen, for sharing it. The trouble that I usually run into is that the photo that I'm comparing to is too grainy and it can't get a very distinct image. So if you have any suggestions, Karen, for improving that process, I don't know if you've gone that far. Feel free to share them in the comments because I have struggled with that a little bit. But that's a great tip. So thanks for that. Andrew, some of his Canadian were United Empire loyalists. So happy Canada Day to you, Andrew. And, down with the rebels, I suppose. Let's not celebrate Independence Day. But of course, a lot of the loyalists moved from the colonies up into Canada during that period. So a real period of strife across the colonies, of course. Um, we've talked about before. You can see any of my other July 4 broadcasts. Okay, Victoria with another holiday. All Saints Day is a big one in Italy in November, and many visited their loved ones in cemeteries. So visiting graves has provided me with great info. That's interesting. That's fantastic. I didn't actually know that. I don't think I've ever heard of All Saints Day in Italy, but I don't have any Italian ancestry, so I don't know much about Italian traditions and cultures. So that's interesting. That's really good. Um, Karen's rabbit hole time, daysoftheyear.com. Yeah. Um, Oh, Kim with another really good celebration, Guy Fawkes Night, right? Which I have heard about. I've never been in country for that celebration, although I would love to see it someday, where we celebrate a failed attempt to blow up king in parliament. Yeah, love it. David adding to the census conversation, the 31 Canadian census has lots of great info. Value of home or cost of rent, how many rooms used by the family, did they own a radio, immigration, naturalization years. Absolutely, David. Thanks for calling out those details. And then he adds also person's race and religion. Um, Definitely. I think there's 30 something odd questions that they asked. That's off memory. I don't know if that number is exactly correct, but a lot of information. And keep in mind too when they're taking this census, kind of similar to 1921 in England, right? That all of the Allied countries are still feeling the repercussions of the war. The Depression has started, right? The Great Depression has started, which is one of the reasons why Canada is asking so many questions about occupation. They ask a lot of detailed information. Have you worked? How much did you work, et cetera? And you see it in the U.S. Census as well, but in 1930. But there's a lot of detail there because the government, of course, is specifically looking for information about particular pieces of information. And the economy is a big issue, right? And it's a big problem everywhere around the world. And so everybody's trying to gather information, statistical information. For kind of solving those issues across each of their countries. So yeah, fascinating questions. um, Okay, let's see. What else? Couple migration comments. Oh, All Saints Day. That's a great one, Shirley. Yeah, it's the day before Halloween. Absolutely. And I think, Halloween is kind of the thing now, very culturally important and big and commercial. So yeah, how do we think about All Saints Day and how it related to our ancestors? Yeah, that's a great holiday to bring up, Shirley. Thanks for that. Um, oh, 40 questions. Thanks, David. Not 30 something, but 40 questions asked in the 1931 census. That's great. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, cool. All right. Lots of good conversation today. This has been really good. We are almost. Oh, it is. Sorry, the day after. I apologize. The day after is All Saints Day. Day after Halloween. Yep. Thanks for the corrections, guys. Good. 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 Okay. So I'm challenging you this weekend to think about how your ancestors celebrated holidays, and on both sides. No matter where you are in the world. I was going to say both sides of the pond, but actually the Earth is round. So anywhere in the globe, uh, how did they celebrate? What did they do? Did they celebrate? Did they acknowledge these events in their lifetimes? Did they care? Was it as big of a deal, right? Or has this commercial impact kind of made it more of a thing for us today than it was for them? There's a lot to think about here, and there's a lot of opportunity to kind of unpack whether it's from a social history perspective or an actual like genealogy, like research. What were my ancestors actually doing on that night or that day, right? So I'll leave that with you guys. Think about your immigrant ancestors. Think about the people who kind of settled those areas, settled those countries, but also where were they when the Constitution of Canada was ratified? Where were they when the Declaration of Independence was first published in a newspaper and made available for people to see and read and hear because it was read out loud in many, many communities across the colonies? How did they feel if they were sitting in England when they got news that these upstart colonies had kind of revolted against the crown and the British government altogether? So opportunity for us to explore across these holidays some of the more interesting bits, I think, of our ancestors' lives. Um, right, lots of good questions to ask ourselves, and we will end with oh, okay, two last good comments because there's been a couple more that have come in while I was kind of doing that. This one's great, actually. In Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, which are obviously very close together. They have an annual joint week celebration starting with huge fireworks on the Detroit River between them. Memories of mom taking us to the fireworks. That's really, really cool. I hope that you are preserving those memories, and you're kind of documenting that part of your life and your childhood, but also just that tradition, right? If I had ancestors in that area, I would definitely want to know how that started, because obviously the Detroit River would have been a point of contention, right? During both the Revolution and the War of 1812, I would think it would have been strategically very important. So how did those two sides get together and start celebrating together? I love that. That's really, really cool. Victoria adds that her great grandmother's first husband went to Canada and would see me settled in America and just never came back for her, the children. I have a couple of those too. She later remarried, so presumed dead, or abandoned, right? Or, and just as well otherwise, she wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have Victoria if this hadn't happened. So I guess we have a little bit to celebrate. It seems like a weird word to use, but that's okay. All right. So have a wonderful weekend. Celebrate lots, if you choose to. And Anya has found the day for all of us, everybody's day in this community. 9th of March is genealogy day. And every year I think about this, and every year I forget to talk about it. So the 9th of March is genealogy day. Write it on your calendars, put it in your diaries. We should celebrate together genealogy day, because that's what brings us all together at the end of the day anyway, right? All right. So thanks very much. Thanks, Liam, for doing the comments. We appreciate you. Thanks to everybody for being here. Happy Canada Day. Happy Independence Day. And enjoy your weekend, everybody. And we'll see you next week back, of course, on Friday for Fun My Past Friday.